Good morning to you all. This is a challenging session. We are going to talk about the Greek deep tech, building on it, building the ecosystem of it. And before we start and we dive into the potential and challenges of the Greek deep tech, I think it would be useful to have an idea of about where exactly does it stand right now. Mr. Emiris, could you give us an idea? Could you tell us?
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity also to open the panel. I think we are at the crossroads that we can look at things very positively. On the other hand, there's many things to be done. I see that some of the questions that we were raising some years ago are now standard. I see student teams working on spin-offs. I see research centers that I'm representing right now producing or letting spin-offs go out in the market, often with collaborations outside Greece. And I see some traction of this community. On the other hand, we need more mobility, I would say in one word. Our groups have to be more extrovert. Funding is coming, but maybe we need still some financial tools. I'm sure we're going to hear about them. And more details that I'll develop, maybe not all of it right now, but I see some infrastructural, some institutional things that are missing still.
You mentioned collaborations with institutions abroad. Could you give us an idea what our main partners are and where they come from?
So from my limited experience, I see that, for instance, I would say maybe 1/3 of our spin-offs right now are collaborating with groups outside Greece. So I have a very concrete example from Athena Research Center, but I see also other research centers or even universities. This could be collaborations that start through a European project. This is the most common. Sometimes it's a very active group in the UK, in Italy. These are examples that we have worked with that are attracting our talent and are creating joint teams. And I think it's also a win-win always, because our teams need to be open to the European market. The Greek market is very, very small. They need to have these connections, and it helps them very much to talk to people outside Greece. Sometimes they are incorporated outside Greece, and this opens up funding opportunities, market opportunities.
Okay. Mr. Papakirilou, could the Greek deep tech be a possible field of investment?
We believe so, yes. At the Hellenic Development Bank, we develop and apply into the market financial instruments. That we do also in collaboration with the Hellenic Development Bank of Investments, which is our subsidiary that acts as a fund of funds, so covering really the venture capital and private equity sector. And the idea is to try and cover as much as we can the full life cycle of a company, especially on the early stages where it's quite challenging to find investment. I think in the past few years we've seen a great change in the Greek ecosystem, not only in terms of funding opportunities, but also in terms of this networking, I think that was mentioned, mentoring opportunities. We really see that these teams develop, and in their turn, they can also develop the market further. From our side, most of the financial instruments we currently have focus in what I would say is later stages of a company's life, because primarily we use a loan as a financial instrument, and that means you need to have a certain maturity in order to use these instruments. But we are in the process of designing a product that will cover the very early stage, and in particular the patent stage, where Greece, even though it has very strong primary research, we don't yet see that in the number of patents, and in particular in the commercialization of these ideas. So we are really putting our weight now to develop an instrument for that part, exactly because I think that's where it's really needed and where funding is the most challenging.
Okay, we might come back to that, but let's see how bridging the gap between academia and the business world has always been a challenge for Greece. And Mr. Ligris, you are one of the people who managed to do that. And could you tell us, give us some ideas about how to insensitivize academia to dig into deep tech, and how can we ensure that breakthrough initiatives translate into real-world products or applications?
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for having me. I think it's really important to look at some of the examples that exist in some of the other ecosystems where there's strong academic research institutes that are supporting a lot of initiatives in terms of developing breakthrough technologies, deep tech hardware. Software has obviously always been a little bit easier, continues to get easier, especially in cloud environments and in a more global economy. But I think when you look at some of the examples of ecosystems that have really leaned into having a very pragmatic approach to licensing technology to researchers, taking the position, obviously I'm going to be biased, at MIT, we're really, really lenient in terms of innovation and intellectual property coming from students. It's treated differently than PhDs and postdocs and faculty members. We want to encourage that type of behavior because that's where it's very difficult to ask more conservative investors and banks to lean in really early to deep tech or hardware. Easier to look at it sometimes from a software perspective, but it's much harder when the capital investment upfront can be so immense. Academic institutions actually play a critical role. They're the third leg in that stool to be able to really provide the necessary framework and breeding ground for those types of technologies to be built upon. So looking at what has worked at other academic institutions where they take an approach which is, I believe, sort of the first pass being, how can we look at opportunities to commercialize and incentivize the behavior that we want? And I think that the behavior that everyone wants is to see things not just work in a lab, but be commercialized and see them in practice. And that, by the way, is not my quote. Charlie Munger, the great Charlie Munger, used to always say, "Incentivize, show me the behavior, I'll show you. Show me the incentive, I'll show you the results." And I think finding opportunities to incentivize researchers in academic institutions to be more lenient and look at licensing opportunities and ways to be able to promote people to build great things, but then partner with the private sector and those individual entrepreneurs to commercialize.
Do you see a carrot and stick approach working? For example, instead of just giving incentives, having punishments or cutting funding if it doesn't work, if you don't show real life products? Do you think that might work, or is it too? So I think penalizing people for experimentation is never a good idea. I think you want to look at things from an open lens. I mean, people will tell you that there's entrepreneurs that learn more from a failed startup than they do from a great success startup. Like one of the most challenging things is when somebody has a really successful company in the beginning as their first opportunity, and they think it's easy to repeat. And so I don't believe in penalizing. Obviously, you penalize bad behavior. You don't want to be the next Theranos, but you do want to look at things from the lens that we want people to experiment, and experimentation will oftentimes result in failure. But it's only by being able to go at bat several times and try those opportunities where you'll see some promising opportunities come up. And I think that's one of the things that's interesting, looking at we're seeing investors, even from the US, start looking at emerging markets like Greece, like the Middle East, with a much more optimistic lens. And I think that's really positive, and it's our story to tell and to show how incredible our academic institutions are. Mr. Emiris and Mr. Ligris talked about a pragmatic approach. Do you see that in Greek academia, and how can we enhance it?
So first of all, we have to say something in defense of academia. When it comes to entrepreneurship, that disruptive entrepreneurship relies on good academic results. Having said that, we really need to go a step further. Institutions have to work in this direction, and in this respect, I can say that research centers that, again, I represent, are putting the emphasis on applied research. And I can give an example of robotics. We recently inaugurated the Hellenic Robotics Center, co-funded by the European Union. It's a 30 million plus initiative and modeled to a large extent on the MIT maker spaces. because we have some MIT people there that want to create labs. These are modern, smart labs, I would say, hands-on labs. And we are planning to have them all over, 3 or 4 of them in different cities in Greece. Let me add here, though, that Greece is a small country, and what we do not have is focus. We have a lot of activities, funding, universities try to be to support entrepreneurship and so on, but we have not decided on a few strategic domains that could be competitive at the international level. And recently we had the discussion of Israel focusing on cybersecurity. Yep. So in Greece we have not done this discussion, and it seems that it's rather a flat effort rather than being focused on certain strategic priorities.
You mentioned Israel, and I want to use that example to talk about other fields that where deep tech could come from. Israel, for example, we know it uses its defense industry to bring the technology out and commercialize it. Could that be something that Greece could also do, Mr. Ligris and Mr. Emiris?
I'm happy to jump in. I think so first of all, I couldn't agree more. Focus is an issue for everybody, but as an outsider, sort of having grown up in the States, and obviously I love Greece, it's pretty clear. I was very actively, I was one of the faculty members involved in the Global Startup Workshop that we hosted here in Athens a couple of years ago. The aperture is really wide open. Everyone is trying to solve a lot of things. And what do they say? When you chase all the rabbits, you get none, right? You chase one, you get it. So when you look at some of the subject matter subjects and industries that are particularly concentrated in Greece, tourism, shipping, agriculture, if you just start there, the opportunities are fairly enormous. I mean, we talk a lot about Israel and Tel Aviv as a hub for cybersecurity. They have an AI startup for autonomous navigation of ships. And that's in Israel. And Israel is not a top shipping hub like Greece is. So I think focusing on the things that we know a lot about, we can test in those 3 specific categories, the amount of experimentation and partnership that can exist between government and private sector is massive. And so that focus piece is really, really important.
If I may add, it's not an easy task in the sense that one has to make some political decisions that will make groups unhappy or that will prioritize funding. You asked before about punishing. I would say rather incentivize the strategic directions, which might leave some people outside, some institutions outside. We have a tool there that was not mentioned, that I wanted to bring it into the conversation, which is evaluation and taking into account the results of evaluation. So in Greece, we do evaluations, and these are an important part of the process, both at universities, research centers, spin-offs, companies are evaluated by the market. It's important, though, to use the results of this evaluation to see, keep track and see how we can push forward what is deemed more important and what will help a strategic focus.
Ms. Papakirilou, to advance all of this, we need capital, and probably capital with risk with appetite for risk. Are there any targeted tools that could help the Greek deep tech?
Yes, exactly, because we also believe that innovation is key in terms of really developing entrepreneurship in the country. We have some specific tools that really focus on innovative companies and really try to incentivize innovation. So an example of that is we have a guarantee fund for innovation, and that has something quite unusual apart from the usual guarantees, which are quite high. We also have an incentive that if you fulfill certain innovation criteria that you set up in the beginning, then at the end of the implementation of the investment plan, you can get up to 20% of your loan capital back. So it's really a very important financial incentive, especially for dynamic companies that have high growth rates, because this really gives them the opportunity to grow. So it's an instrument, it's relatively recent, it's now in the market for almost 2 years. And we really believe in it.
How much capital is available in that
Yes,
fund?
we have a budget of 130 million, and this is
400.
distributed through the banking sector. So it's also very important that we keep this market perspective. So we design the tool, we set the criteria, but then the banks actually distribute in the market based on their credit policies and really the market information. So we ensure that the capital goes where it's most needed.
Mr. Ligris, could the Greek deep tech attract investors from abroad, and what role could the diaspora play in that?
So I think it has to. My perspective on this is you just can't just rely on grants or government funding. You have to engage the private sector, and you need private investment, especially for early on. And I think the diaspora can be extraordinarily powerful. We have people not just in academia with Greek backgrounds, but also in the venture community. Many that have had successful exits that want legacy of being part of sort of that story in that next chapter. But I think that going back to the concept of, how do you solve for this? We have to obsess around the concept of the globalization piece. We are a global economy. It doesn't matter where you are in the world.
It doesn't seem very global nowadays.
Well,
it's quite fragmented.
We're still a global economy, irrespective of what it costs to come in and out. There's still a market there, and I think that the challenges that have existed is, I think that Europe has focused on deploying euros to markets in Europe and in Greece as well, but it's just not enough. And we have to attract outside venture. I think that we keep using this example, but 20 years ago, if you suggested that some of the largest venture funds from Silicon Valley would have active offices in Israel and in Tel Aviv, they will look at you and scratch their head. And now we're seeing some of the more prolific law firms that do venture deals in the States opening offices in Tel Aviv. So the reality is that Greece is well positioned to do that, especially when you look at geographically where we're located, some of these industries that we talked about. I'm actually extraordinarily impressed by the academic institutes that we have here in Greece. And so it's everybody's job to make sure that the world is paying attention to that and putting eyes on Greece in terms of what we're doing here. Because I can tell you that I suspect that if I actually showed up here with a plan and the right team, getting the government to sort of lean in and take a look at opportunities that could create businesses in Greece is something that I'm sure we would look at. But I really go back to this point, like, we need private sector money, not just government money.
Mr. Emiris, can we attract private money out of Europe? Because you mentioned earlier that we mostly collaborate with European countries, but I'm afraid Europe is not exactly the champion in deep tech. USA is leading and China probably is following. Do we have any network connections outside Europe?
We do, and I think it's important, and I think Greece is doing well in this respect. Also, the geographic position helps. We definitely have to, and we are looking at Middle East or East. I think attracting funding is one aspect. Attracting talent is an aspect that could go with that, and also experiences. And in fact, I guess people know about that when an investment comes in, they also bring in market opportunities with them. And we need to be very open. I think this is one of the weaknesses of Greek teams sometimes that I see start at universities or research centers. They might not be completely convinced of the need to be extrovert from the first minute, and also of the need to have some kind of business support to take their idea to a level like we're discussing, like a level for looking for funding outside Greece, looking for collaborations outside Greece. It's very often for researchers to nurture their baby and be hard for them to let it go at the hands of a business helper, I would say, or business collaborator, or a bigger entity that will take equity on their creation. And I think these are important steps, especially if you are looking outside Greece, because you're talking to people with a different culture, you're talking to people with different priorities, but they do help you really grow. I think which is the real challenge here.
Mr.
Yes, and if I may add on the leverage, I think on getting in the private sector, I think leverage is a great way to do it. And you see that when you, for example, one of the financial instruments that is used in the market is venture capital funds, because even if you have some public funding from EU funds, you still have the private funding that comes in, and that ensures the size is important in terms of having an effect in the market. The same thing as mentioned, when we go via the banks, you also have this private sector leverage. I think on average our programs have a leverage ratio of 3, so that means we come with 5 billion public funds, you end up with 15 billion in the market. So I think this is a very important point, and I do see in Greece this turn from grants to financial instruments, exactly because this bringing in of the private sector is very important.
And is it going global factor that you take into account when you decide who to finance? What other priorities you look for?
From our side, I would say the going global not necessarily is a factor for us. It's important to fund the company on implementing a business plan. If that also involves it going global, of course, that's something that they can do. But for us, the most important thing is to give a guideline in terms of really supporting investment plans, supporting companies that really have high growth potential. And again, as I mentioned, we do that via intermediaries who really have the knowledge to make this choice. So from our side, as a Hellenic Development Bank, it's not that we go directly in the market, we go indirectly and using the entities that really have the knowledge to do that.
Mostly innovators are young people. Is age something that might work as a disadvantage for funding?
No, I think what it becomes difficult is if you don't have a track record. And in particular, when we're talking about lending, I think not having, financial statements for a year, even though our programs allow it, it's very difficult in practical terms. So I think that is one of the difficulties some of the companies that are founded by younger people have, that they don't have a financial track record to show. We have specific programs that provide higher guarantees so that we force a bit the intermediaries to go via that direction, but it's always, I would say, a challenge. It's not very easy to kind of fund these groups. And that's where instruments like, for example, the patent fund that we're in the process of developing could help, exactly because it would give them the starting point if there is a patent involved, of course.
You see me smiling because I would put my money in your bank. Because you're saying everything right. The challenge with entrepreneurship is, in building companies, is underwriting from that lens for early stage is hard. And so I reflect back and look at the weekend when Silicon Valley Bank collapsed. All of us that are involved in early stage companies spent the entire weekend figuring out what was cash flow going to look for portfolio companies the following week. Imagine if you had to wait for the government to figure out how you're going to fund bridge financing for companies in 48 hours. That's very hard to do. Or for a bank to be able to underwrite that, another bank to be able to underwrite that. So this is exactly why early stage risk capital through venture is important, because banks are great for providing funding at growth stage and so on and so forth. But when you look at the data, and we spend a lot of time researching, age groups, number of founders, what's the ultimate success recipe? Well, the ultimate success recipe, the data shows that 2 founders is better than 1. 3 founders is better than 2 and 1. 4 founders is better than 3, 2, and 1. 40-year-old founders do better than 20-year-old founders. And that's just the reality of it. And so, irrespective of the balance sheet or the track record, there is a certain level of maturity, understanding, experience that comes along, and discipline that comes along with founders that tend to be, it's not age, it's time and experience.
Yes, but who is willing to take the risk of funding such endeavors?
Venture capitalists. They're in the business of betting on 100 things, knowing that 90 of them will fail.
Do you see them staying as bold as they used to be up until now in the current circumstances? I'm talking about, the trade wars, the limits.
So,
don't you think they will be affected by the current
well, they are affected. They have been affected. I mean, venture has had several difficult years. Why are they having a difficult time? Because venture works when the street is a two-way street. When you're investing in businesses and there's no IPOs happening, and there's limited exits, and M&A activity is dried up, it's very hard because if you can't get capital out of the success stories, it's very hard to convince LPs to put money into the next fund or to put it to the same extent. And so what we're dealing with now is I think we're at an interesting inflection point. You're starting to see more M&A activity by subsectors, and we've been tracking that. And so I think the next couple of years will be good, but there's been no shortage of General Catalyst raised a $9 billion fund just now. I have different opinions around the size of funds and what that means for the venture ecosystem, but there is risk capital, and there's a lot of capital that stayed liquid in cash that is ready for returns. Some of the pressures we're seeing in the public markets now, where yields are being pushed, you'll see investors and be like, well, if I'm going to get 4% for a 10-year bond, I'd rather keep it in cash, or I'd rather take more risk for a higher yield. And I think that the pendulum is starting to swing.
How can we bring, Mr. Emiris, more of that capital in Greece?
It's important to put the spotlight also on the teams. So we have good teams. We already talked about having to be extrovert. So this is going to attract private investors from outside. Institutional reform is another aspect. I have to say that there has been a lot of improvements in this direction. We are rather happy with the current law, which is a big improvement from the previous situation, but it's not perfect. We have already made some proposals to the Ministry of Development. I think the state understands.
Could you tell us about these proposals? What they're about?
So I could say that, so on the good side is that the current law allows for researchers or professors to take time off their position without losing it, and to bring in some group, some entrepreneurship activity into their group, or to leave the university or the research center for a certain time. What is a bit stringent right now is the relationship between universities or research centers with the spin-off. It's not very open. It has very prescribed modalities with which a company will be called a spin-off. And in fact, it turns out that some of our spin-offs are not spin-offs according to the law, okay? Because the law is a bit stringent in the way that we have to work with them. So overall, I repeat, it's much better than before. First of all, it's regulated in some extent. There is a law about it. And we would expect it to be more lenient in this respect. I have to say, though, that, okay, we are talking about the ecosystem, we are talking about all the funding that exists. We have to think also of the start-uppers, the people that take the risk. So it's good to give them all these opportunities because it's a huge risk, and we know that it requires devotion and sacrifices, and not all of them will end up being a successful startup. So it's important to have this environment that is encouraging and the funding that is available, because otherwise we would not have people taking the step forward.
Let me remind our audience that you could use your QR codes to ask us questions we can pose to our speakers later. And we talked a lot about capital. Let's talk about human capital a bit. Mr. Emiris, how can we produce more human capital devoted to deep tech and make it stay in Greece or work for Greek companies?
Yeah, I think we are realizing the need, first of all, and at different levels. Courses at the university, support for teams that grow. Again, research centers play a very important role here because they focus on applied research as opposed to pure research. I have to say that the European Union also is an important actor in this, because researchers are used to work with research projects funded primarily by the European Union. When the European Union starts realizing some truths about this game that we are discussing here, it's a step forward. And I have two parameters to mention here. First of all is funding for mature ideas that try to get into the market. There is now the so-called European Innovation Council with funding for groups and projects that try to get into the market, different levels. Some of them are closer to research, some of them are closer to the market. In fact, there is an instrument of the European Union that will take equity of these groups. So it's the most advanced of these EIC funding tools. The second aspect for European Union that is a big funder of applied research is to realize that the emphasis should not be in networking, should be in small focused teams. So most of the European projects require very big networks, like 10 partners. This cannot become a company. We have seen, we see it every day. We see very good results coming out of projects with 10 partners, which are then impossible to commercialize. IP is complicated. The priorities of every group, country, university are divergent. EIC has funding for projects with 3 partners, for instance. Sometimes even this is large. We hear that it's close to the statistical optimum. So it's important to move in this direction, also at a national level. So this comes back a little bit to my previous comment that we lack focus. Right now, national funding and European funding doesn't have focus, especially national funding. It's horizontal, it's flat. And this goes back to the discussion of national priorities.
We have a couple of questions from our audience. Tassos asks if there are any initiatives for deep tech incubators. I guess Mr. Emiris could answer that. And do applying startups rated and funded only based on their business plan or through other processes as well? I guess Ms. Papakirilou could answer that.
Okay, about incubators, I should say that all research centers right now doing deep tech have some kind of incubator accelerator. At Athena Research Center, we have Coralia incubator right now focusing on space technology, handling a very big project from European Space Agency. It acts as an incubator accelerator. I could say that the average type of collaboration is to incubate a startup for up to 2 years, provide some seed funding, mentoring, networking, legal support, and let it grow. I should say that the team of Coralia has now Coralia Ventures, which is a low TRL venture capital thanks to the funding of HDB. And we can also, so there's a lot of them, I'm not gonna talk about all of them, but I should also mention incubation efforts within projects like the robotics project I mentioned before. It's called Hellenic Robotics Center of Excellence. It's not a research project, it's meant as an ecosystem builder. It started on January 1st, it's meant for 6 years, and it's supposed to work with small groups in putting robotics technology in different applications, either mature, of course, mature I mean applied research, towards commercialization. So it's a low TRL, low technical readiness level, let's say, incubator.
Okay. Ms. Papakirilou?
Yes, I think I will mention, for example, for the venture capital and private equity, if I may speak on behalf of HDBI, the Hellenic Development Bank of Investment, they follow a fully delegated model. That means that you delegate the decision-making to the venture capital fund team. And I can tell you from previous knowledge, I mean, they never focus only on the business plan. It's a lot about the human capital that we mentioned and other aspects. And for that, I will give you also an example. For example, for our Guarantee Fund for Innovation, we also have, for example, criteria on ESG. Because we don't want to focus only on a business plan, only on innovation. You need to make sure that the company develops in all aspects. And so there are also specific criteria, for example, for ESG. But again, you can set the criteria, you can set the sectors or the type of technologies you focus, but then you delegate the decision to the ones that know best.
Okay, Melissa asks about angel investors. Are they impacting the development of the Greek deep tech market? And is this something that could be more encouraged? I guess Mr. Emiris, Mr. Ligris, answer that.
I would say in general, yes, they do. Our experience has been with more institutional investors.
Do we have any
so
angel
far-
investors for starters?
We do.
Obviously.
There is Hellenic
We-
also a network of business angels in Greece.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
we'll talk about that. So,
Okay, one more thing. I would like to add that trying to bring into some focus into the system and some consolidation, which is another weakness that we didn't discuss today, fragmentation. So trying to work towards consolidation. We often build alliances, and I can talk about a network of tech transfer offices that we have right now between the Athens University of Economics and Business, the National Technical University, Athena Research Center, Democritus. It's called Science Agora. It's supposed to be a one-stop shop for angel investors, for companies that are looking for funding and are looking for incubation. And it's already in its third, fourth year. It's going to enter, Science Agora is going to enter into its second incarnation, let's say, Science Agora 2.0. So, yes, there are.
Mr. Ligris, what do angel investors usually look for, and how can we attract more?
Yeah, so actually, I did my first angel, so I do 30 to 40 investments a year. I did my first one ever in Greece last year. And
Have you invested in a Greek deep tech company?
no, software in Greece.
Why not?
Because so that's a great question. That's the point. Deep tech, angel investing, the amount of capital typically required for deep tech, hardware, and some of the things that encompass deep tech, it is just a different animal. And the amount of capital required, the risk profile is much different. The follow-on, the necessity for bridge financing or an intermediary round is much higher in these situations, and so it's harder. You have a pretty robust and emerging ecosystem of angel investors here that are comprised of not just Greeks here in Greece, but also from diaspora and also successful Greek entrepreneurs from all over the world that feel that they're ready to put their money where their mouth is and support the ecosystem. But if you need to raise a couple $1 million through angels, depending on the size of the checks that they're writing, that can be a pretty significant effort, even if you're able to align with several that are interested in what you're doing. And so I think that's one of the challenges is...
Effort in what direction? What do you mean?
I'm sorry?
Effort in what direction?
Well, just managing, collecting 15 or 20 different checks from angels and keeping them updated and keeping them informed. Angels can be very powerful, especially subject matter experts that can be helpful with introductions, that can be advisors and guides to the company as well. It's easier to see traction in a software company, and I think angels get more excited about deploying capital there because it's something that they can see, they can watch. I'm not saying that it's impossible in deep tech. I just think that the barrier to entry is higher because there's a higher risk profile, but also typically a larger commitment.
Ms. Papakirilou?
I think what I was mentioning is that there is a Hellenic network of business angels, and I think it has to do also with the maturity of the market. If once you have people that are exiting, usually they come back into the industry and they will become angel investors. So as the venture capital and private equity industry matures in Greece, you see that more and more. So I think we already see business angels action, and I think we will see more in the coming years as well, especially now with Equifund 2, that there is more specialization to specific industries. I think this will work more and more, which is great news.
Mm-hmm. Coming to the close of this session, if you could suggest one step that the Greek state, the Greek academia, the Greek ecosystem should take, what would you propose? What would you prioritize? Let's start with Ms. Papakirilou.
Okay, I think it was mentioned, the human capital aspect. I think very often we see that this educational aspect is extremely important, education and networking. And in particular, because you can have great researchers, but that doesn't mean that they're very good business people. So either we need to make sure that they have the educational tools to also develop these skills to a certain extent, or really try to network so that you can really have teams, which we also heard is the ideal, to have more than one partner that can collaborate. I think it's key, especially when we talk about the move from research to the market, to have really strong teams that cover both sides. I think that's quite important.
And how can we actually improve networking?
I think a lot of it has to do with how, I mean, the academia, and in particular, more about the different entities speaking to each other. So, for example, we as an institution that funds, we are in discussion with research centers like Athena to see how we can collaborate to really develop this human capital in any way we can. So I think it's really about the different entities speaking to each other, but for the educational aspect, I think academia really has the key role.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Ligris?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think I'm going to go up one level, which is it's about people, because you need a cultural change in terms of looking at it from every lens, whether it be investment. The human capital piece is going to be difficult to solve. That's just that to me is probably one of the more challenging pieces. But it starts with people, and it starts with bringing people into the ecosystem, whether they're existing companies elsewhere, and asking them to expand to Greece. I think it starts with bringing investors here from the venture community to see that Greece is a place you should be looking at. And so I really think it starts with...
How can we do that? I mean...
Well, so
what we could sell as a country?
I think, first of all, you got to get them there.
Sorry?
You have to get them here. Oh. You got to bring them here. And I think that it sounds easy, but one of my friends is a general partner of a venture fund in Boston. All of their investments are in the U.S. The first investment they made outside the U.S. was in Greece. He called me last year.
Did they come for a holiday before?
No. Oh. He was introduced to the founder of the company. The founder of the company from Greece came to the States to raise money, was bold enough to do that and meet with them. They were impressed with the team and the growth.
So we need to reach out.
Yes.
For starters.
We need to reach out. We need to bring him here. He called me. His name is Scott. He called me walking out of the GB in the middle of summer. We had actually gone to Wimbledon together. And he says to me, "Why do you live in Boston? This place is amazing. It's gorgeous. I'm going to my board meeting and I love it here. I want to invest more here."
So you say we can actually use some of the other assets of the country, like its attractiveness as a destination.
Absolutely.
To our advantage, to attract more
Absolutely.
investments. Mr. Emiris?
I'll go institutional. So I'll talk about consolidation.
Well played.
And focus. Already mentioned. So this can be done either through funding, through strategic decisions. We all know that very often our decisions have been, based on other criteria, geographic, I don't know. We need to have criteria that are thematic, that are forward-looking, and that exploit already the teams that are already performing. I'm not saying we are going to invent new directions, but we have to choose which to prioritize.
I guess a decision made on a real economy, right? The sectors where we already have a basis, a productive basis.
It can be on the real economy, it can be, it has to be in collaboration with the government and the institutions, and it has to look at real economy. It needs all the stakeholders to go forward, and it has to be disruptive, as we already said, not on the national level, beyond the national level. Yeah.
Well, I guess we can wrap it up here. Thank you all so much for this insightful discussion.
Thank you.